Hey everyone, welcome back to your Dawn of Autonomy podcast. I'm Dawn Zoldi, your host, CEO of P3 Tech Consulting, and publisher at Autonomy Global. We're kicking off a brand new month. We're dedicating this to the theme of OEM leaders, and we've got quite a leader on the show today. Tom Furey is with Sagetech Avionics, and we were just talking about this, tied for the longest running guest on the show. He's been with us all 5 years. We so appreciate him, and it's been so awesome, Tom, to watch your company grow and evolve over these last years with the industry. And so welcome back.
Okay. Well, Don, it's great to be back. And I guess kind of like a bad penny, you just can't get rid of me. I keep coming back time after time. But it's always a pleasure to talk. And if I think through the conversations we've had over our history together on this, man, the excitement, but the ups and downs and the hurry up and waits kind of thing. But we continue to see a lot of exciting things going on and a lot of opportunities for all of us in this space.
Yeah, absolutely. And the ups and downs, I think that really kind of encapsulates where we've been even just this year, right? In the drone industry where, we saw a horrific crash from a safety standpoint in aviation in the January timeframe. It was commercial aviation, but all these have ripple effects, right, across the industry from a safety standpoint. We're seeing lots of things happening over in Ukraine and Russia still with drones. And so it's been a wild year, wild run. And then Part 108 has come out. So I'm super excited to talk to you about all of these different facets, Tom. But before we do, and we talk about all the things that Sagetech brings to the fight, if you will, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself for those that don't know you?
Okay. Well, as Don mentioned, I'm Tom Furey. I'm the CEO of Sagetech Avionics. We're a small business that is, to me, we sort of straddle the line between the drone industry and commercial aviation. My background is through a variety of general management. I've been with Sagetech or its predecessor for about 10 years now, which seems like only yesterday. Started my career in the U.S. Navy flying A-6 intruders off of aircraft carriers and been lots of interesting and fun places since.
Yeah, so a decade with Sagetech, so a milestone there.
Yeah.
Half of that time you've spent talking to us, which we love. But let's talk about the company because you said it straddles commercial aviation and the drone world, also straddles military and the commercial sectors
Yep.
both. So can you give us kind of that 30-second elevator pitch of Sagetech and what it's all about?
So Sagetech, like I mentioned, small business but growing. We're right around 50 right now. Celebrated last November our 50-year anniversary, Sagetech Avionics since incorporation, which just to survive as a small business for 5 years, in particular in this industry, is exciting. But we are mostly engineers. So of those 50 some odd people we have, 40 some odd of those are engineers working very hard around safety, and that's safety of flight. And that is our vision. Safe airspace through advancing technology. And then our mission really is to create small, so low swap, size, weight, and power, certified avionics or certifiable avionics that enable airspace integration for all types of aircraft and protect our warfighters. So in that mission and vision, which we talk about all the time as a company, we're here to create very robust, certifiable technology to help keep things safe. And we think we see continued evolution of industry of a requirement of that, right? So from our perspective, the drone industry, I think, originally felt like a Silicon Valley type of startup kind of thing. But I could reboot my iPhone and not really worry about it. But if you've got a hunk of metal or even composite over people, you can't really reboot it and not worry about it. So you've got Silicon Valley type innovation interacting with aerospace, right, which requires a lot of certification. And that's the spot we live in between those, creating drone enabled or drone enablers in technology, but to the level of airspace safety required by the FAA and other certified bodies.
Awesome, awesome. And like, the other certifiable bodies are in the DoD as well. I forget the name of that office, Tom. That
It's the acronym of acronyms, AIMS, which is AIMS, which The A is ATCRABS, which is ATCRBS, Air Traffic Control Radar Beacon System, and then I is Identify Friend or Foe, and then it's Mode 5 or Mark 12. It's called Systems. So, but they are an international, so they're an Air Force program office that supports the certification of transponders and IFF and similar technologies, not only for US DoD, but internationally. So we often have to get in the queue with getting things approved and certified by them behind lots of our international partners.
And Tom, I think one of the first things that you and I worked on together was letting people know about the Mark 12B transponder, the IFF transponder for the military, which was, if I recall correctly, the first low swap certified mode 5. Am I saying this all right?
Yep.
Uh, okay, yay, transponder. I learned something. So I want to go there. So I want to kind of divide this segment into two parts, if you will. Let's talk about the military stuff first, because safety, use your word again, it straddles all worlds when it comes to aviation. And protecting those warfighters, like you talked about, is so critically important. We saw in the recent past, the catastrophe that was Jordan Tower 22. That was the first airstrike, I believe, in over 40 years, that resulted in soldiers, sailor, airmen, marine deaths on the ground. And people were scratching their heads like, how did that drone, how was it able to kind of get through protections and kill our folks, to kill our soldiers? You and I have talked about this before, but I want to talk about that and your transponder and IFF. So let's kind of start simple, and let's talk about what IFF is in the first place, and then let's talk about the MX-12B, and what that brings to the fight. So let's go IFF first.
Okay, sure. So IFF was originally, I won't go through the detailed history, right? But basically, the Brits in World War II needed a way to differentiate between their adversary, the Germans, coming to bomb them, and their boys coming home, right? So they invented what has now become modern IFF, Identify Friend or Foe. But modern IFF is essentially an encrypted version of normal air traffic control transponder solutions. So a normal air traffic control, we have things called Mode A, Mode C, Mode S, and Mode S has a lot of potential information where an air traffic controller, so LA Center, can interrogate an aircraft that it just sees as a blip on its radar and can get back information regarding its call sign, its pressure, altitude, its latitude, longitude, direction, all the kind of things that the air traffic controller needs to control that aircraft and protect the airspace. Take that same information and encrypt it. And now, basically, by me as an aircraft with IFF recognizing an interrogation and responding, I'm not only giving that same type of air traffic information back to the interrogator, but I'm confirming that I'm friendly. So this technology is very closely held. It is available to US, to NATO, and then other specific allies around the world. And each and every time we go to export one, we have to get an export license specific for that customer, specific for that end use, because it's very tightly controlled. So now when a Patriot missile battery or a ship or an F-15 or an F-35 interrogates another aircraft, they get back the little green light that says it's friendly, they don't shoot them down. And that's kind of IFF in a nutshell, if you will. The interrogation, recognize the interrogation and respond properly, therefore I'm friendly.
Encrypted at a military level, closely held.
Yep,
So explain then how the MX-12B came on the scene, and the implications of that particular product.
sure. Well, Sagetech for years, and you and I were joking earlier, I'm now over 10 years with Sagetech. The most recent version is Sagetech Avionics, which is a little over 5 years, where we narrowed our focus to the things that we felt were important. But more than 10 years ago, really about 14 years ago, Sagetech started selling very small transponders that were not certified, but essentially did the same thing as normal commercial civil transponders did with modes A, C, and S. And those were used very, very frequently by by drone OEMs that were either selling to or flying on behalf of the U.S. DoD in different places like Iraq and Afghanistan, et cetera. And that was done to ensure that there was to maintain air traffic control. Right? I've got a drone coming home and I've got a KC-135 in the pattern. I don't want them to hit each other.
Right.
Mode 5 was something that had been developed, but by 2020, it was now mandated across NATO that we switch from the old version of IFF, Mode 4, which was around since back when I flew many decades ago, right? Or a few decades ago. And, Mode 5 we knew was coming along, and we knew that drones were going to continue to be a major part of warfare and aerospace in particular. So we started a long time ago working on taking what's typically the size of a cinder block and 10 pounds or so, and shrinking it down while still maintaining the same capabilities. So the MX-12B actually was the result of that. So we took a very robust platform. I like to say our engineers bend the rules of physics. They maybe don't break them, but they stress them quite a bit to see what they could do about a very highly amplified transmission that is required right next to a super sensitive receiver, and then doing all this magic in a box the size of a deck of cards that weighs about a third of a pound. We got that certified in 2021, and that was the first, as you mentioned, first quote micro IFF, which is what the military will typically term it. It's the same IFF, but in a micro form factor. So at that time, we were compared to, I think the quote reduced size transponders the military had from legacy providers was around 7 pounds. And then ours comes in at a third of a pound. And obviously you can fit, I think, 10 of them inside that legacy box. So anyway, amazing. That was a long answer to a short question. Sorry.
That's no, it's great. No, I love listening to you, Tom, because you always just make it so understandable. Everything you talk about. These are complex topics, actually. And, as they say, picture paints 1,000 words. We've got a little video to roll here about the MX-12B. So let's go ahead, and Tom, if you could walk us through this.
Yeah. Okay. So introducing the MX-12B, I don't need to read to you. As you can see by that depiction right there, we have magical engineers that stuff a lot of stuff into a box. But basically, that's kind of saying it's smaller, lighter, cheaper, and it can leap small buildings in a single bound. It has connections to the same antennas, and then a connection to either the autopilot or through the flight management system or to a display within a manned aircraft, right? So an important thing that wasn't shown somehow in that video, right? But we talk about that. There's micro IFF under the AIM certification, this Mark 12B certification, and that's where we got the name MX-12B. So the Mark 12B certification is for Mode 5 IFF transponders. And there are requirements there for diversity antennas because aircraft can be large, and diversity means 2 different antennas that operate in a unique way, one on top, one on bottom, so that the aircraft is never shadowed. The antenna is never shadowed and hidden by another part of it. And then also there's a certain power transmission requirement so that the aircraft can be seen at an appropriate distance. Right. There's an appendix to that specification that allows for a single antenna and a lower power transmission. And we have some competitors that leverage that for an easier transponder to make. We did not. We took the full spec, crammed it into a very small box with diversity antennas, so which doubles everything in terms of the receiver and all those kind of things, and the full power, and put it in there. So now our box is small enough for a drone, but capable enough for crewed aircraft or manned aircraft.
Awesome, Tom. I didn't realize that in terms of the antenna. That's all new to me too. And we've been talking for years, as I mentioned. But so let's kind of go back to this Jordan Tower 22 thing, right? So this incident, very significant for the military in terms of drone attacks, and if memory serves, it wasn't a small drone. a smaller drone that we would think about. It was a larger drone, right? That did that damage.
Yeah, it was. We believe. I believe, and again, I haven't been privy, thankfully, to the classified investigation into that.
Yeah,
So therefore, I can't share anything classified because I
yeah,
have no
sure.
idea. But I believe what I heard from public sources was that it was like a Shahed style drone, like an Iranian style drone,
So
which
is
is
that like
roughly
the equivalent of a military group three, almost like
group
a
group two to group three. Maybe not the big, because I think group three goes all the way up to 1,320 pounds.
yeah.
Remarkably similar to the maximum
The
size on the
the
Part 108 that we'll talk
yep,
about later,
yep,
right? But it goes from 55 up to that 1,320. So somewhere in there, I believe it was probably in the lower end of that group three, or up just above the group two size, similar to what's been a bedrock of military drone use for many years, even decades. The Scan Eagle aircraft, which is
yes,
typically around a 40 to 60 pound aircraft, depending on the configuration, maybe a little bit bigger than that. And from what I guess is that Tower 22 was expecting a friendly drone coming back, maybe Scan Eagle size or something like that. And because they weren't leveraging IFF technology, um, another drone came in around the same time. They kind of assumed that it was theirs coming home, and it was not, and resulting in 3 deaths and 47 injured. Which, as we've talked about quite a few times, and we continue to talk, Sagetech continues to talk to the military about this, um, the challenge of the proliferation of technology, and the fact that compared to 20 years ago, when we were the only ones, we and our allies were the only ones with really robust technology, and particularly drone technology, now everybody and their cousin has access to it, right? So we've got to identify what's friendly and what's potentially hostile. IFF is a great way to do that. It's not without its challenges, even our low size, weight, and power. I mentioned that there's some very secure stuff. We partner with a crypto computer that's about the same size as our
yeah,
box. But now you have a fairly costly and you know, from my perspective, rather large solution, right? We like things smaller and smaller and smaller.
right.
Um, so that we're still working with the military to see whether IFF, and if IFF, what configuration of IFF is appropriate as we go smaller and smaller and smaller in the drones that we use in combat. But anyway, went off on a tangent. Yeah, that Tower 22. It's unfortunate when tragedy is what really spurs people to recognize that they have a problem, and that continues to occur in history, right? But that was a tragedy. And if you recall, right around that same time, there were other things that indicated, Houston, we have a problem, right? There was a German frigate, I think 2 weeks later, or 2 weeks earlier, 2 weeks later maybe, that shot a couple of missiles at a U.S. Reaper. And so why was that, right? We're friendly with the Germans, we're on the same team, and they shouldn't be shooting at our aircraft.
Yeah,
Thankfully, they missed, but that's another problem for somebody else to solve.
right.
So we believe IFF is a great solution for warfighter safety, to protect our own assets, and also to prevent fratricide, so we don't waste our money by shooting down our own drones. Interestingly, I think it was the Israelis in their Gazan conflict, right, that they have spiked the amount of blue on blue engagements, friendly engagements, because they're kind of trying to shoot anything out of the sky. And
Yeah,
I've heard something that 40% or more of what they've shot down has been their own aircraft.
that's
But
crazy.
they need to do that because there's no way to identify the two. There's not great ways to universally identify friendly versus foe. And that's what we work on, and that's what we continue to work with the DoD on, trying to find the right solutions for smaller drones.
Well, that's why you're an OEM leader, Tom, because this is a significant gap globally, as you mentioned, not just for US or NATO, but other forces. And, all we continue to see is more and more drones on the battlefield, smaller and smaller.
Yep.
I mean, look, they're using first person view FPV drones in Ukraine, right? They're using like fiber optic cables and whatnot. I mean, It's almost like I was talking to Brian Sardock from Bavona AI. He was part of our Law Tech Connect back in May, and I think we're streaming that panel about kind of lessons learned from Ukraine for the commercial world, like next month or this month in September. And he was basically saying, look, if your information from the battlefield is more than a week or two old, it's irrelevant because things change that quickly. And so I'm glad that you're behind the scenes working on the solution to create a smaller and smaller swap IFF for the safety of our troops. And that's maybe also a good segue, Tom, to talk about the commercial sector and all the things you're doing over there as well. And as we were talking about before the show started, sadly, the military and the commercial world literally and figuratively collided back in January with that fatal aircraft mishap in the Washington, D.C. area. And I know your team has been very much a part of, let's call it the forensics of that with NTSB after the fact, some hearings. So I'm sure most people know what that incident was, but why don't you kind of set the stage of what it was, and then let's talk about some of the technologies that you have that are relevant to preventing such incidents, and then we'll get into those hearings and what those
Yep.
mean for the future. So let's start with the incident just briefly.
Sure. So briefly, and again, I don't remember the exact day, but there was an Army Black Hawk helicopter that was flying on a route that they typically fly. They fly all the time, right? And there was well qualified pilot in command. There was an instructor pilot on board and crew on board. And then there was an American Airlines CRJ aircraft that was coming into land at I want to call it National Airport, but Reagan National Airport,
Yep.
I guess, right?
Yes.
And that's a very busy traffic corridor. And the two collided, right? So I think 67 people on board were killed. I mean, obviously, everyone on both aircraft were killed. And this is a prime example. And it's not a military problem per se. There are some aspects of this that are caused by the fact that one was a military aircraft. But avoiding collisions in congested airspace and the area around Reagan National Airport is certainly congested airspace, and that's a problem. And particularly when you think about, we still have fundamentally 91.113 says it's the pilot's responsibility to see and avoid other aircraft, and fundamentally that's where the accountability rests, right? At the end of the day, the buck stops there with the pilot of the aircraft or the operator of the aircraft. It's certainly, if it's a drone. To see an aircraft, I don't know if you've ever looked around when you're coming into land at National Airport, and I've flown in my Navy days in environments like that as well. To look around there, it's not just that there's a lot of aircraft. You've got the Wilson Bridge lights. You've got lights on top of buildings. You've got so many different visual distractions around. To try and pick out at night a light that is the aircraft that you could possibly hit is very, very difficult. So there are technologies that can help with that, and a couple of which the primary technologies there are things that we've been focused on for years.
Yeah, so let's talk about some of those.
Yeah. So first of all, there's ADSB, and another one of those great acronyms, right? I'm sure you know off the tip of your tongue that's Aircraft Dependent Surveillance Broadcast, which it doesn't make any sense unless you get deep into the technology. But basically, where transponders that we talked about before are an interrogation and reply, and you and I have used this before. I go right to my juvenile mind and I go, that's the Marco Polo thing, right? The interrogator says Marco, the transponder says Polo. But that gets crowded in terms of, because when the interrogator says Marco, depending on the mode that it's in, maybe everybody that can hear it says Polo. So it's
like
very,
you
very
do in the
crowded.
pool when you're playing
exactly.
that.
So then ADSB is more like what I like to say, the Horton Hears a Who. And if anybody has remembered that, there was the people on the dust spec that just kept saying, we are here, we are here, we are here. Well, that's ADSB. So instead of relying on interrogation from LA Center or from Atlanta Center or from whatever, You just say a few times a second, about 6 times a second on average, I'm here, and some information about yourself. Now, the importance of that is if you interrogate and respond, the interrogator now knows that you have someone somewhere, but that's it, right? So if I'm another aircraft and the air traffic control center has interrogated someone and says there's traffic there, now I'm relying on that air traffic controller who's busy, right, to tell me where that traffic is and in relation to me. Wouldn't it be great if I could hear something from that other aircraft and know that that aircraft is there without there being an air traffic controller involved? And that's what ADS-B enables. So not only are you saying all the time, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here, but now ADS-B receivers, if installed on other aircraft, are a passive way for them to see what traffic is around. So that's one level of technology that improves the safety case for a situation such as we saw at Reagan Airport, right? Still a couple of issues with that. First of all, interestingly, since 2020, again, a magic year in terms of mandates, right? But since 2020, most aircraft flying in most airspace in the US, not all, but most, are required to transmit ADS-B. But nobody's required to have an ADS-B receiver. So we're required to put the information out there, but nobody's required. Nobody's required to listen, right?
Yeah, it's like tree falls in the woods and no one's there to hear it make a sound.
Yeah, and in this case, you might get hit by it, right?
Not cool. Yeah, not cool at all.
So, however, ADS-B, when you have a receiver in the cockpit, can do wonders for helping the pilot who is responsible for the safety of the aircraft, or the operator at the ground control station of a drone, to put eyes on traffic, right? It gives you a graphic display that says you've got traffic 1 o'clock at 2 miles, and you go look and you say, okay, now that's the light I need to focus on. So that's one thing. But again, the cockpit of an aircraft or the ground control station of a drone, but in this case, this is crewed aircraft, right? The cockpit of an aircraft is a very busy place, especially when you're flying at low altitude, the 400-foot range, 200-foot range. Your head's on a swivel. You're maybe looking in at your instruments, and I think a colonel in National NTSB, National Transportation Safety Board hearing, had said, "Hey, we look in the cockpit about once every 10 seconds." So most of the time, you're looking out for traffic. So now, while it's great to have a little scope that tells you that there's traffic in different places, the pilot is appropriately not going to spend a whole lot of time staring at that thing.
Right.
So now you go to the next level of safety, and that's where our true focus is. And we can run the little background thing now as an image on that for ACAS.
Oh, there we go.
The image you see, super crowded. I think that was a NASA/FAA image, so all rights go to NASA on that or something like that. But basically, ACAS X, so ACAS, Airborne Collision Avoidance Systems. ACAS X is this current generation of that, and it's for whole airspace. And what that...
Can I ask you a question? Is this like the next generation of TCAS?
It's exactly that, right? So it's eliminate a lot of the restrictions that were on the use of TCAS, and I'll explain that in a second.
Okay.
So now you have ACAS X, and ACAS X has a whole bunch of little ways to differentiate which version of ACAS X. So TCAS was TCAS. You had TCAS 1, and then TCAS 2 did certain functions. They weren't for different aircraft that had new capability, right? And then along comes ACAS X. Some of the limitations...
I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you.
No, go ahead. That's right.
Terrain Collision and Avoidance System. That's what TCAS.
Not terrain, traffic.
Traffic Collision and Avoidance System. So what's ACAS?
ACAS is Airborne Collision Avoidance System. So yeah, don't get me into that. I mean, because truthfully with TCAS, Europe called it ACAS. And now we come along with a new ACAS. But now everybody, I think, is around with ACAS X as the most modern technology, because there's a few things. So TCAS limits the aircraft that it's applicable to. So TCAS was designed for commercial aircraft. It was started after 2 commercial transport aircraft, airliners, crashed over the Grand Canyon in 1947. And that was when that technology was started to develop, right? And so it requires that you can climb at a certain rate, 2,500 feet per minute. It requires that your aircraft is moving at greater than 100 knots to be effective, or something like that, right? So it's pretty restrictive. An
Well,
eVTOL aircraft.
you alluded to this, but with the ADS-B, you have to look at a screen. With TCAS, it kind of yells at you.
It does yell at you. There's oral alerts, right? And then there's also alerts in your cockpit that tells you you have a traffic advisory that says there's traffic at a certain place. It might say traffic. And then there's a resolution advisory. And in theory, the traffic advisory is advisory in nature. You've got traffic. And then the resolution advisory is directive in nature, that tells that you must follow, right? If you have that installed,
climb or
climb or descend, and that's all it says on TCAS. So TCAS, and when the two aircraft have transponders that are talking to each other, they do this little magic of putting different information in different registers. So one will climb and one will descend to avoid a collision, but it's always vertical advisories, climbing and descending to avoid potential collisions.
So how is ACAS, how does it improve on that?
So ACAS improves in a bunch of different dimensions. ACAS is better. And it was developed by people that develop things that I can barely pronounce, right? But these Markovian processes, it's probabilistic. It uses machine learning in developing the algorithms. But a couple of things. So the ACAS X has a bunch of variants. There's ACAS XA, which essentially is the next version of TCAS 2. There's ACAS XO for different unique operations, like two aircraft landing on parallel runways. You don't want to have them trying to avoid each other and miss the runways.
Okay.
You've got ACAS XU, which is for larger fixed wing drones, like Reapers and things like that, right? Okay. You've got ACAS SXU, which is for small drones, rotary or fixed wing. And that's passive. So that's for the kind of quote below 55 pound. And there's sort of a gray line is 55 pounds, but that's roughly where the cutoff is. And then you've got ACAS XR, which is for rotorcraft. And interestingly for us, we're focused on that right now because this will be the first time that rotorcraft have a collision avoidance system that is relevant for a rotorcraft, right? Because the case,
so that's crazy to me.
Yeah, so the one, so that's one thing. It's applicability to all different aircraft that are going to be darkening the skies, right? That's one advantage that ACAS X brings. There's a few others. There's the potential to reduce the restrictions on altitude. So TCAS, and again, don't quote me on this because I don't study TCAS because we're not making it, but I think it's about 1,000 feet below that. Resolution advisories are suppressed or something like that. So once you get in, once you're coming in, then some of your alerting is repressed. And this instance that we talked about around National Airport was at low altitude. So those they would have had suppressed alerting in that place. ACAS allows the system to operate at a lower altitude. It also reduces more than 50% of the quote nuisance alerts, right? So there are times with TCAS when it's telling you either that you've got a traffic or potentially a resolution that are not valid. They're false positives, right? You're not on a collision course with that aircraft for a variety of different reasons. And ACAS, the way the algorithm has been developed, is much better at filtering out false or nuisance alerts, so greater than 50%. So those are the primary reasons that ACAS is an evolution of TCAS, a better evolution, right? The applicability across different aircraft. Oh, and it also gives you not just climb and descend alerting, which obviously at low altitude, a descend alert would be a problem. Yeah. It can give you turn left and turn right alerts. So it can give you horizontal or vertical guidance or blended. So it might tell you turn right and climb or turn left and descend or things like that.
Yeah, I was smiling because you had forgotten that. And I remember you told me that when I was preparing for some Fox News interview way back then after that incident,
Yep.
picking your brain on all this, and you're like, yeah, and it gives you these other, kind of directions that in other dimensions that has never been possible before. So that's amazing. So Tom, you guys are working on ACAS at Sagetech.
Yeah, and to bring that, yes, and to bring that back to this collision we were talking about, right, which is unfortunate, but we need to learn from these things, right?
Yeah,
Um, the visual separation, listening to the air traffic controller, and then looking for traffic is the first level of safety. ADS-B can provide another level of safety, but now to me, ACAS, I won't say it's the ultimate, but it's probably the best technology for that kind of safety right now, because it will tell you that you have it's the same kind of two-level warnings that TCAS had. There's a remain well clear, which is um, an alert that it tells you, hey, you've got traffic, you might want to avoid this quadrant kind of thing. But then when there's an imminent potential collision, it gives you direct guidance. And again, there's visual, but there's also oral in your ears clues to say, climb at a certain rate and turn left or something like that.
yeah,
And to me, but when you're in this busy environment and the pilot's head's on a swivel and you've got gauges and you've got engines to worry about and a mission to perform and all those different things, if you can avoid having to be forced to get your eyes on something or to look at a screen and then interpret it and then think about what do I do and know if I'm going to turn left, now I've got to look over to my left to make sure I'm not going to turn into somebody, right? ACAS
yeah.
does all of that thinking for the pilot and gives them direct guidance. It says, look, climb and turn left. And then the
Well,
pilot can recover from that situation and then figure out where to go from there.
Well, what you're talking about, as I'm listening to you, Tom, we're talking about advanced levels of automation. And, with the Part 108 just coming out, the notice of public rulemaking, right? Still got to
Yep.
get those comments in, still have to adjudicate that, put out a final rule. But, when you read it as it is today, there seems to be kind of increasing requirements for autonomy as you get to higher category levels, as they call them in the rule,
Mm-hmm.
more complex operations, higher ground and air risk, things like this. So it's really exciting that you're involved in ACAS. So let me ask you this: two things. First, just very briefly, because we're running out of time, we had so much to talk about. Your team was involved in the NTSB hearings on this. And there were also some follow on MIT studies based on that collision that we learned some things about ACAS. Can you briefly kind of summarize what we learned about the effectiveness of it? And then, secondly, I know this is a compound question, so bear with me. Secondly, I want to talk about like Part 108 and where do you see ACAS and where do you see this collision avoidance going for beyond visual line of sight for the drone industry? So let's start with the NTSB and MIT lessons learned on ACAS or collision avoidance.
Yep. Okay. So in that you're correct, and thank you for recalling that. We did our director of systems engineering, Stacy Rowland, who's not just really great at our company, but he's an industry renowned expert in TCAS and ACAS and surveillance systems and transponders, but really around collision avoidance. So he was asked to, I guess, present or testify at the NTSB hearing that was looking into this collision, and he did that alongside an Army colonel that we've been working very closely with because we're in the process of taking our little IFS and putting it inside a box that'll fit in the Army's current helicopters for retrofitting their fleet, both to get rid of an obsolescence problem they have, but also to enable them to upgrade their capabilities to take advantage of those new levels of safety, ADS-B and ACAS. So they talked obviously from an Army perspective, since they were one of the players in this incident, right? They talked about their aircraft, their current fleet equipage, and what their intents were with their aircraft over time, or intent is with their aircraft over time. And then Stacy from our company talked about ACAS and talked about its capabilities, and then talked about our solution for ACAS, which we're kind of a leader in ACAS, and we're absolutely the leader in low swap, size, weight, and power ACAS. I think we're one of the few games in town. So that was in the hearing where we just provided that information. to the Transportation Safety Board. So as they contemplate things, they will figure out what their recommendations are as a result of this. We already have a sense that the recommendation is going to be that we should start relying on ACAS, and particularly ACAS XR, leading into what you had just alluded to as well. During that same hearing, and as part of public record, I believe it was MIT that did the study, but they took the exact scenario that occurred in that collision, simulated it multiple times with different equipage on the two different aircraft, and 15 different scenarios with multiple simulations, right? In 13 of those scenarios, the aircraft came within a couple of 100 feet of each other, and even narrower than that, horizontal, maybe just a little bit of vertical miss distance. So definitely close to a near mid-air collision, or an actual collision. So an unsafe condition. 2 of the 15 were the only 2 that had ACAS XR on board the helicopter. And those had, I think, an 1,800 and a 2,200 foot horizontal miss distance. So a third of a mile away, well clear of the other aircraft. Something I want to note also is that typically military aircraft, when they're on relatively sensitive missions, which many of them are in the US, they don't, with approval, they don't broadcast their ADS-B. So it sort of relies on the helicopter to see the other aircraft and avoid it, because they're probably not, if it's a military helicopter, going to be transmitting their position for the other aircraft. Right. And that was a key reason why the helicopter ACAS XR was so critical, so it could see the cues from the CRJ and avoid those. So there was not only the miss distance that it provided in these simulations, but also calculations of when the pilot would be alerted to this. And there was very little time in any scenario other than with ACAS. With ACAS, they had 78 seconds worth of warning to avoid that other aircraft. And with direct guidance at, and I think it was like 25 seconds to what they should have done to avoid that, which is that is a lot of time in an aircraft to provide to perform avoidance maneuvers, and particularly when you're told what those maneuvers should be, climb and turn right or whatever it might have been. So we expect the NTSB will find that ACAS is a key enabler for safe congested airspace, and that's exactly what we've been focused on. To your next phase of that question, around 0.108, where does that apply? It's similar but different, right? It's just another, I mean, with Part 108, beyond visual line of sight, now you've got uncrewed aircraft that are flying beyond the line of sight of their operators, so things need to be relatively autonomous, or the information needs to be transmitted to the ground in such a timely manner that they can perform things without seeing the aircraft. And ACAS collision avoidance is a great technology that I think will help with that. It does appear that in the NPRM that the FAA is contemplating requiring that there be some sort of detect and avoid system on board for both cooperative and non-cooperative, and that's kind of our life. That's what we live in with ACAS as the brains. And there are people that do the create your, do it yourself kind of detect and avoid, like, hey, I see something out there, so I'm going to do something to get away, which is great. And I think, I'm not sure what the FAA will require in terms of specifics, but ACAS is a, again, not a Sagetech technology. The algorithms themselves developed by Johns Hopkins and MIT Lincoln Laboratories. But if you've got two, as we've mentioned, if you've got 2 aircraft coming towards each other and one decides to turn right and the other decides to turn left, you've still got a collision. With ACAS, you provide for that coordination between them, and you provide a predictable avoidance maneuver, which is another level of safety. So I suspect from a Part 108 perspective, as we see the DAA use evolve, we'll start to see the need for a more standardized DAA, so it may require ACAS or something like that. The other thing is non-cooperative sensing is a technology that hasn't been perfected yet, right? We continue to see things improving, but to pick up a small drone or pick up another aircraft, if they're not transmitting ADS-B, is difficult to do reliably. So I think we'll continue to see more of positioning for electronic conspicuity, and whether that be ADSB or repurposing remote ID for safety reasons or things like that. I think that'll continue to be part of this, and we see the seeds for that in the Part 108.
Okay, awesome. Well, that's great. I know we're getting close to our time, so Tom, I want to wrap up here, and if you could just give us, an indication of what we can expect from Sagetech over the next couple months, where you see the company going as a continued OEM leader, and then of course wrap up with how people can reach you and learn more about
Yep.
Sagetech.
Okay, great. So the things you can expect to see from us are sort of more of the same. Our vision has been and our mission have been very, very consistent over the years. As I mentioned, with our partnership with the Army to retrofit their helicopters to advance their technology, we're taking our low swap technology and enabling it for better, faster, cheaper, stronger into crewed aviation with that. And then we'll continue to work on layering in. So what we do is with that MX-12B, the V4 is what we're calling it now. It's a slightly different hardware platform. We're putting that on the Army helicopters. We're making that available for other drones and other aircraft as well. But we'll be able to put ACAS right inside that same box. So it'll be
Oh,
an
wow.
all-in-one super low swap solution. So that's what we're kind of focused on. We'll be next week at AUVSI Pathfinder in Huntsville, Alabama. If anybody, I won't be able to unfortunately make it, but our team will be there at our booth, and I think it's booth number 1 if you need to look us up down there. And then you can find us at sagetech.com. You can find me on LinkedIn under Tom Furey, Furey. Don't forget the E. Or look at the wanted posters in the post office. You might see me there too.
I don't think so, but anyway, no, that's awesome. Thank you, Tom. I mean, that was a real around the world.
Yeah, it was.
No, it was awesome though. Really, really well done as always. Very understandable. What you do is so critically important for aircraft safety on the manned side, on the uncrewed side, the DoD side, this commercial and civilian side. Thank you for all you do. Thank you for sponsoring this month of OEM leaders that will follow after you in the coming weeks. And we wish you the best luck, and we'll be in touch for sure. So thanks again. And thank you, everybody out there. That's all she wrote. We are out here.
Thanks, Don. Thanks, everyone.